trying to torture my son so that he doesn't seem as smart as he really is. That's not government research. That's hate crime. That's trying to make a kid look like he's not as smart as he is, or trying to dumb him down. Because why? They didn't want me to look like I had like any kind of intellectual anything upstairs. Or maybe they wanted me to look like just a little bit above average, but not too much. And what would the motive for that be? Again, it seems to be that if my son is made to look less intelligent, whose cause does that serve? It would only serve someone who wants to make maybe my son look less intelligent, because maybe have me look less intelligent because they are trying to make me look as unattractive as possible, because there has always been this fear of someone in particular possibly getting involved with me. And if I've already been involved with that person and I didn't know the whole story of what was behind it or around it, I don't know. I have some extremely good ideas. I don't think that I'm out in the I don't think I'm way out there to have wondered about a couple of possibilities at all, because I have had enough things said to me and seen enough things and heard enough things to know that I'm not totally off base. But as to exactly who this person is and who this group is that has this leader, whether it's a mother and who is a very powerful woman, or a father who's a very powerful man, or in a group that supports those people, they really have gone after me. I mean, that is pretty obvious. So the strangest thing to me, again, as I say, is how crazy is it that the only thing that makes this group feel less threatened, to the point that they don't commit hate crimes, and they feel that they can, well, she can be smart and maybe sing a little bit as long as she's married off to him. And they don't have to worry about her anymore. What is the threat of a single woman? I think that this country is nuts. And whatever other countries they're working with to do this to me and my son because of some weird fear of a dating game occurring somewhere, I think that they're nuts. So I'm prefacing my next part about what CPS did to me and all of these incredible things that have been done to me. When who would have thought all I had to do was be married? How do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you catch a cloud and pin it down? How do you solve a problem like Maria? Of the wisp, a clown. You like to tell her many a time she ought to understand. But how do you make her stay and listen to all you say? How do you hold a moonbeam in your hand? Oh, how do you solve a problem like Maria? How do you hold a moonbeam in your hand? And I remember I brought that song up a couple of times to the monks, and I think they thought maybe the people who had already implanted me with microchips, that was hilarious. They're not holding a moonbeam in their hand, they're using their technology to torture my son through laser beams. I mean, some kind of laser beam. I don't know what kind, I don't know if it's ultrasound or whatever, but I just talked about it in my last clip, the kinds of burns he had all over his body from it. And then I'm being tortured because somebody can't solve this problem of me. And for as much as people say that it's not all about me, they have certainly made a lot of money off of me and spent a lot of money. I mean, like, I think that they must have spent and invested so much money trying to harm me and keep me down, with the entire incentive and idea that if they did, their payoff eventually, once they got what they wanted and certain things fell into place, their payoff would definitely be rewarding and would give them a great return on all of the efforts that they'd already made. When I was in Wenatchee, visiting my son with Sue there, as I say, I didn't realize she was writing me up as saying things that I wasn't saying in the visit. And at some point, I possibly did get, before there was even a contested shelter care hearing, I think I maybe did get one, like, copy of a note, visitation note from her, because it was in the summer. And so it might have been right before I left for DC from Birch Bay. And that was when she said that I had put a coat on my son, but I hadn't, because it was hot weather, and she made it sound like I was trying to do something weird to my child and inappropriate, given the weather, the temperature. So then I kept asking the attorneys to give me discovery. I was then assigned, since my military attorney dropped out, or basically my parents said they couldn't pay for him. They said if I didn't do what he wanted to do, I said, basically I withdrew from his representation, because I didn't like how he told me at the very last minute to show up on my own. And it didn't work out, obviously. And my parents didn't like the fact that, so they said that I withdrew from the representation, but it's very possible that someone just told them to say that, because we're all having to work for and be used by the United States government. And prior to my son ever being taken, I mean, I really wondered if my parents actually wanted my son to be with me or not, because they had suggested that my son would be better off, or that I would be better off having my son adopted, because also to them, I think with their conservative ideas and thoughts of, you know, how I would fit into society, they wanted me to be married. And I remember one excuse that came up was, well, it's harder to, it's not as attractive, or a lot of men don't want to date somebody who already has a kid. And I said, I don't care. I'm not on this earth to make myself look attractive and appealing for a man who, you know, and what, I'm going to ditch my kid because I might be slightly less appealing. I didn't care at all about that. I felt fine with me and my son, and if I was going to be single forever, so be it. So that was never a concern to me. I knew that I loved my child. I knew that I was suited to being a mother, and I knew I was going to be a very good single mother. And I had already read everything about daycare, childcare, the effect of a child being raised by a single parent, the kinds of influences you want to bring around a child that needs to also socialize and be around someone of their own gender as well, and have role models, that kind of thing. I didn't have any problem with what I knew was in store. So when my parents, so I wasn't sure what it was all about, but I do think that they were pressured by the government to not pay for an attorney any further, and that attorney was the military man. And after that, I was assigned a public defender, and I was told Paul Castle was one of the better public defenders. However, Paul Castle had already been insulted by me, because I had gone to that local jail, and when one of the inmates said his attorney, who was Paul Castle, wasn't helping him or showing up at all to help him, I contacted Paul Castle on this inmate's behalf, and I said, your client wants to see you. I don't really think that anybody liked that. I don't believe Paul Castle liked that I did that. And as it turned out, Paul Castle was one of the best friends of the judge that they had assigned to this case. So the judge was Judge Hotchkiss, Dennis Hotchkiss. And he's basically he's part of a motorcycle gang, which is really great for a judge. I believe he was in part of a motorcycle gang when he was younger, and he probably still has some ties to them. He started a law firm with Paul Castle. So he and Paul were in business together. It was Paul and this judge. And when Paul already didn't like me because I had stood up for his client and suggested that he wasn't helping his client, Paul didn't like me, didn't like the fact that I was nosing into his business and asking him why he wasn't helping his client, and giving his client a book on civil rights. So he didn't like me, and the judge didn't like me. The judge liked whoever, was going to do him favors. The judge did not like me. He was prejudiced against me from the start, and he knew Paul Castle, and there was a conflict of interest with Paul Castle. I tried to recuse Paul Castle, and the judge refused to even allow me to recuse him. I made a motion myself to recuse Paul Castle, and the judge didn't hold a hearing. I requested a hearing. The judge didn't follow procedure and hold a hearing or anything. He just said, "No, you don't get a different attorney." And the other document that I filed on my own with that was addressed or read by Judge Dennis Hotchkiss was a motion for change of venue, because clearly there was conflict of interest in my having a CPS case in that town. Everybody was connected to everybody. I already had interactions with most of the judges. The judges all were connected. I had a medical malpractice lawsuit that I could have held there. The police had stood by as a man raped me in the town. They refused to take any of my reports. I mean, there was no way. The CPS and social services was mad at me because I won a lawsuit against them with the Fair Hearings lawsuit in Olympia. So they were vindictive. And the state, through them, had not reimbursed me my money. The counselor that I went to, as it turned out, didn't want to talk about the FBI because, guess what? She's connected to the FBI. And her best friend is my social worker. So there were way too many conflicts of interest. There was no possible way I could have a fair hearing in that town. It was impossible. I knew that, so I filed, when Paul Castle refused to file a motion for change of venue, so that the hearings could be held in a different area, like in the Bellingham area where I was working. The Bellingham CPS agreed to it. They said they didn't have a problem with it. But Judge Hotchkiss, that motion, my motion for change of venue, it disappeared.